Imagism. Now, Imagism is almost, we can say, a similar sort of movement or similar sort of school that became popular at that time, but like having certain other characteristics, because a number of schools were emerging in the beginning of in the beginning of this 20th century. Immediately after 1901, these schools, they started developing and they started becoming popular. So Imagism is one of them. A very famous poem of Ezra Pound I have taken here: in a station of the metro, the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bow. This is the whole poem. All right. So look, you look at the poems which were written in the Victorian era or Romantic period. You know how the writers, they used to write down the poems in that period. All right, we know about the long poems written by Tennyson or Browning, or if we go to the Romantic period, like Wordsworth and others, they used to write down such a long poem, such beautiful poem, so many things they used to tell. But look at this poem. This is having just two lines. Okay, just two lines, and the title is "In a Station of the Metro, the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough." So this is a poem, the whole poem, the complete poem by Ezra Pound. It's not, these are not the lines of any poem. This is the complete poem. We'll get back to this poem again. So let's discuss what is this Imagism. So, what is Imagism? It is again an early 20th century poetic movement that emphasized clear, direct language. A clear, direct language. All right. So, this everything is taught or told in just clear language, direct language. Okay, if you get a chance to Google the word haiku on haiku, you will find haiku is a kind of poetry written in Japan, and that is, these are the poems written in three lines only. This is a very famous kind of poetry. So in the same way, these imagists, they got impressed by that haiku in the beginning, and later on this Imagism, this became very clear, very popular. So they actually talked about everything in clear and direct language. Was considered a reaction to the traditions of Romantic and Victorian poetry, which emphasized florid ornamentation of language. So what happened in that Victorian and Romantic period? We know the poetry that was written, that was having ornamentation and of language. Language played a lot of role, and the poetry. If you read a poem by Coleridge, you know that the poems are too lengthy, and language is very important. So in all these poems, language played quite an important role. But in this poem, like this poem which is having approximately 14 words by Ezra Pound, this is the poem which doesn't have that flowery language. So were succinct and to the point. So this poem written by these imagists, what they did, they are writing, whatever they are writing to the point. Language could be symbolic and allegorical. The language could be symbolic. This might be expressing something else, and it can be allegorical also. Yet it also had to be succinct. Look, symbols and allegorical language, allegories, we know these became very popular in 15th 16th century also. But allegories, like when they are using this kind of language, they remained succinct also. They were writing everything in brief. In the If the essence of an object, setting, or cultural movement could be reduced to a few words, then a verse of Imagist poetry only required only those few words and nothing more. So actually, if they were wanted to talk about anything, and that can be reduced just to few words, so for them these few words were much more important, and they didn't want to speak for long time, and they didn't want to write lengthy poems. The poetry of T.E. Helms, the one who is considered as the pioneer of this Imagist movement, two specific Helms poems, "This Autumn" and "A City Sunset," foundational. These are the foundational for Imagists, and these got published in 1909. Display an economy of language that was rare for that time period. All right, so these are the poems which are displaying that economy of language. Everything is expressed in very few words. A movement in the early 20th century Anglo-American poetry that favored precision and imagery and clear, sharp language gave modernism its start in the early 20th century. All right, so in early 20th century, this started is considered to be the first organized modernist literary movement in English language. So this is almost the first organized movement, viewed as a succession of creative movements rather than a continuous or sustained period of development. So it doesn't have a continuous period of development like in succession. We sometimes we found this imagism popular at one time, and then not and then popular at other time. So Topman remarked that it is more accurate to consider imagism not as a doctrine nor even as a poetic school, but as the association of a few poets who were for a certain time in agreement on a small number of important principles. Okay, so what he has remarked that it is better that if we consider just an agreement among few poets, those who wanted to make this idea popular, that what can be expressed in few words, why to use so many words for that. So influenced by the poetic theory of T.E. Helm and by the style of Japanese haiku. So Japanese haiku that actually became that is the thing, that kind of poem which actually impressed these writers. Imagism emerged as a movement spearheaded by Ezra Pound, Hilda Doolittle, Emmy Lowell, and others. So these are the famous writers of this kind of poetry: Ezra Pound, and then Hilda Doolittle, and then Emmy Lowell, very important one, and others revolting against the looseness of texture and endorsing a concept of condensed poetry that abandons conventional materials and versification, is free to choose any subject or to create its own rhythm, uses common speech, and presents an image or the writer's impression of a visual object or scene using a metaphor or by juxtaposing two diverse objects without indication. Okay, so they used a number of techniques in order to in order to put forward a condensed poetry, a condensed poem. Condensed poem means in which there are very few words. So they abandoned whatever the kind of material or the versification styles which the Victorians or the Romantic poets they were using, and they is free to choose any subject to create its own rhythm, and then they use common speech, and then these kind of things which they used in order to express themselves. Then other features: to use the language of common speech, but to employ always the exact words, not the nearly exact nor the merely decorative words. Okay, they used the common speech, but to employ but exact word. Okay, exact word they used, but common speech they used, not merely decorative words, and they didn't want to use all those decorative words which the poets were using, to create new rhythms as the expression of new moods and not to copy old rhythm which merely echo old moods. So if the poem is written in a lengthy poem is written, and then that has a certain kind of moods which other writer may copy and may express himself or herself in the same way, but these writers they wanted to express new moods and entirely different things, and in just few lines, maybe in two lines, to allows absolute freedom in the choice of subject, to present an image, to produce the art. Actually they wanted to produce an image also. So when we look at the poem, or when we see the poem closely, we'll again go back to Ezra Pound's poem. So if we look at the poem very closely, we find that there is an image in the poem. Immediately an image gets created in our mind, to produce poetry that is hard and clear, never blurred nor indefinite. All right, the poem is hard and clear. Everything becomes clear from those two or three lines. Finally, concentration is of the very essence, or concentration is the very essence definitions of poetry. This is the most important thing for them, is to write down concise poetry, concise poems, instead of writing down lengthy poems and having decorative words and flowery language. And there is a little bit of difference between symbolism and imagism. The main difference is this one, that symbolism, they didn't, they, like in 1915 article on La France, the French critic described the imagists as decadents of the French symbolists. So what they said, that imagists, they have actually emerged from symbolist movement, and they are actually doing whatever the symbolists have already done. But there is a difference, and that difference is of precision. So imagists, they wrote very small poems. However, the symbolists, they wrote lengthy poems also. So the difference is that of precision. Then, but this was a short-lived movement, and yet it has like remained a significant movement. William Carlos Williams and Richard Arlington, D.H. Lawrence were other practitioners, while imagism also evident to have influenced T.S. Eliot, W.B. Yeats. These writers, these also got influenced by this imagism, T.S. Eliot and W.B. Yeats also. Then, though the movement was criticized for its obscurity, license, and its restrictiveness, it definitely inaugurated a distinctive feature of modernist poetry. Given its significance, the Imagism movement was surprisingly small and short-lived. The movement officially launched in 1912 and ended in 1917. So this is a short-lived movement which started in 1912 and ended in 1917, involving only a handful of English and American poets. So there were just a few English and American poets, those who followed it. Ezra Pound, we know, is regarded as the intellectual leader of this movement. He is actually considered as the intellectual leader of this movement. And then Emmy Lowell, who is also an important one. Then some Imagist poets, like this is a work written by Lowell in 1915, and this is an anthology in which there are the Imagists articulated their aesthetic ideals, in which the ideals which Imagists they decided, and these ideals are expressed in this some Imagist movement. Some Imagist poets, a reaction against Georgian and Victorian styles, which are characterized by abstract and sentimental language. Okay, so this is because they were very clear, they were very precise, and they just wanted to put forward whatever they were thinking. And so there is a reaction against abstract and sentimental language. Now let's go back to the poem. This again to this Ezra Pound's poem. In a station of the metro, the apparition of these faces and the crowd petals on a wet black bow. So this is having just 14 words. The apparition of these faces in the crowd petals on a wet black bow, and you can see that the poem is not having any rhymes, like rhyming words. Like this is not having any rhyme scheme. Okay, so this is the poem which got published in 1913, embodies the central tenets of the Imagism movement, and this is a very important poem. This is having just 14 words, constructs a clear and compelling image, but it constructs a clear and compelling image. Now, what is the image? The apparition of these faces in the crowd, that there are certain faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. Bough, we know that is like the stem of any tree, and that is black actually, and that is having some petals on it, wet and black. That bough is wet and black, and that there are certain petals. Petals means some flowers would have broken, and those petals would be like on the black bough. So that means that the apparition of these faces, like these people, these the poet has compared the faces of these people with those petals which are there on black bough, wet black bough. So this is the image which the poet has tried to create, conveys an abstract emotional experience without explicitly describing it. He is not describing the things, but the poem is conveying an emotional experience, does not follow a strict meter or rhyme scheme. We cannot see any rhyme scheme here. There is no meter also. The relationship between the two lines is one of imagery. rather than one of sound. So if we look at the poem again, that if we try to find out the relationship between the first and the second line, it's not of like any kind of rhyme scheme or any kind of meter or any kind of thing, but it is the relation of emotion only. Okay, the relation is that of relationship between the two lines is of imagery which he has used. Like the first one is the thing which he can see, and the second one is the kind of metaphor with which he has compared the crowd, the people. Then the image of faces in the crowd is equated with the image of petals on a bough. So image of faces and the crowd is equated with the image of petals on a bough. Remnants of flowers that had just been separated from the tree after rain, a sense of ephemerality is evoked by the precise and concrete image of these delicate petals, which lingers in the reader's mind for much longer than an abstract statement about the transience of life. So that's why this kind of poetry is very important, because if somebody tries to explain us that life is transient, it is not having any intrinsic meaning, and we may die after some time, and we may not live like whatever the kind of lives we are living, we are running after so many things, but the life is bound to life will definitely come to an end. So we are not immortal beings. All right, so this is the thing which the poet has tried to convey through these two lines only, that the apparition of these faces in the crowd, the people there, those who are running here and there in the crowds, the these are just like the petals which are like broken from the flowers, which are actually separated from the flowers, and these are on the bough, and these are just lying here and there on the bough, that these have actually they have actually their lives have actually come to an end. In the same way, the people, those who are running here and there, the poet can easily see that kind of ephemerality of life in the faces of those people, those who are running here and there. So from such a small poem, he has conveyed everything whatever he wanted to convey. So, according to Imagists, the work of a great poet is to select the right image. And this is what Ezra Pound has done here. He has selected the right image that causes the reader to experience a particular emotion or infer a particular reality. So, this is the thing which the Imagists they have tried to convey, that the thing is that we need with the a poet has is just required to select a right image, and if he selects the right image, he'll be able to convey the emotions, and he'll be able to convey the reality also, instead of writing long poems and spending time on writing long poems. And the readers are also, according to them, readers are also not at all interested in reading all those long poems or lengthy poems, because when the emotions can be conveyed through small poems, why to write such a lengthy poems? All right, so this was all about imagism.